The time has finally come. The 2021 NHL expansion draft has been finally concluded. We have the names of all the new players selected by the Seattle Kraken. We'll go through all 30 teams and talk about which player they lost to the Kraken coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, the Seattle expansion draft is now finished, concluded. We finally have concrete evidence of who the 30 selections are from the 30 teams participating in this draft. Just another quick reminder, the Vegas Golden Knights are exempt from this process. It was part of the deal when it became an expansion team. Bill Foley, the owner of the Golden Knights, negotiated that in with Gary Bettman and the NHL that if they had another expansion within, I believe it was 5 years or so, that they would be exempt from the process. So they only pick a player from the other 30 teams. Now, so we're going to jump in here. We're going to look at each player. Now, this video will only be talking about the players actually selected as the expansion draft pick. If any trades were completed, then that'll be discussed in a separate video. So look for that to be popping up here in the channel very, very soon. So let's get started here with the 30 expansion draft selections. From the Arizona Coyotes, the Kraken select forward Tyler Pitlick. Now, there wasn't a great deal of great options with the Coyotes. They could have went with a defenseman like a Labushkin. Otherwise, Pitlick was one of the better players available here to the Seattle Kraken. From the Anaheim Ducks, we've got defenseman Hayden Fleury. Of course, Fleury is just a victim of the numbers game, a great young defenseman with a ton of potential, can play either side. It's a left shot. It should be a great contributor here to the Kraken blue line. From the Boston Bruins, we have another defenseman in Jeremy Lauzon. I know many Bruins fans thought Connor Clifton might be the better option on the blue line. Of course, they had Nick Ritchie at forward exposed as well, but Jeremy Lauzon ends up being the selection here from the Bruins. From the Buffalo Sabres, we have Will Borgen. Now, Borgen's a decent young defenseman with some upside. He certainly could be a regular NHL player getting a bigger role with the Kraken than he did in Buffalo, but certainly another interesting option chosen from the Sabres. From the Calgary Flames, they take captain and one of the top defensemen, left shot Mark Giordano. He's going to be a huge pickup for this Kraken team. Of course, he may not remain with the Kraken. There are rumors of a potential trade, but still, it really is going to be a big loss for the Flames to lose their captain. He was given a difficult task of replacing Jerome McGinley as captain and has had that C on his sweater for a really long time. So this is a really huge loss for the Calgary Flames. From the Carolina Hurricanes, they select Morgan Geekie. Now, Geekie was a little bit of a surprise selection. They opted to pass on forwards like Nino Niederreiter and young defenseman Jake Bean. I really thought Bean might be the better option here for the Kraken, given all the options available from the Carolina Hurricanes. But apparently they were much more satisfied with a lot of the other D-men around the NHL that they had access to, so Geekie ends up being the pick. From the Blackhawks, the Kraken select John Quenneville, another pick that you could say was a little bit of a surprise. There were certainly some other options on this roster, including a guy like Adam Gaudette, for example, or some other defensemen even that were a little bit more likely to be picked by most people doing mock drafts, but it ends up being Quenneville. From the Colorado Avalanche, the Kraken select Jonas Donskoy. Now, Donskoy is an excellent selection. They had some other great options too, like JT Compher. They could have talked to unrestricted free agent and Avalanche captain Gabriel Landeskog, who would believe that they did have some conversations with, but did not agree on a contract. So Donskoy proves to be the selection here. A pretty good second to third line type of player, can chip in on offense and give you some good solid forward minutes as well. So Donskoy is an excellent selection here by the Kraken. From the Columbus Blue Jackets, they select Gavin Bayreuther. Now, this is a surprise pick. They could have taken a player that's much more established, like a Max Domi, for example, or a Dean Kukin. Certainly had some other options. Obviously, there were some things about those guys that they were not fond of. Domi does have some injury concerns going into the season, as he is having off-season surgery. But Bayreuther is certainly a little bit of an unknown, a guy looking for more of an opportunity. We'll see if that opportunity comes in Seattle or where things stand, but certainly a definitely surprise pick. The Kraken select from the Dallas Stars defenseman Jamie Alexiak. Alexiak was a pending unrestricted free agent. He's an absolutely huge guy, one of the tallest, heaviest players in the NHL. He's really come a long, long way in the last few years in his development as a defenseman, able to chip in offensively, but can be very tough to play against. Certainly can use that size to his advantage for sure. Alexiak ended up signing a 5-year deal valued at $4.6 million. Now, the Dallas Stars were rumored to be considering trading Alexiak at the deadline, decided to hang on to him, tried to re-sign him, and as much as they would have liked to have kept the player, I don't think they would have been able to afford to pay him that much money. So it's not only a good opportunity to go to Seattle for a new team, but it's also a great financial opportunity for him as well to earn more money. From the Detroit Red Wings, the Kraken select defenseman Dennis Cholowski. Now this is another one. It's a little bit of a surprise pick. They had some other options. They could have taken like a young forward like a Evgeny Svechnikov. They could have taken another more established defenseman like a Troy Stetcher. But instead, they go for the 23-year-old Cholowski, who's certainly has some potential. I think you could call him a high-risk, high-reward kind of D. Hasn't had the greatest start to his time in Detroit. So he'll go to Seattle. And considering how analytically driven this team is, I am a little surprised they go with this player. But we'll see what he can become with the Kraken. From the Edmonton Oilers, the Seattle Kraken select defenseman Adam Larsson. Now Larsson, another UFA who signed a new contract here with Seattle, signs a 4-year deal at $4 million. You have to think the Oilers would have been able to get that deal done. It's really surprising that it got to this point. That tells me that Larsson really wanted a change of scenery. We had reports back as far as the NHL trade deadline that the Oilers were really close to getting an extension in place with Larsson. It never came to be. So this is certainly going to create a big hole for the Edmonton Oilers. You wonder if maybe he might be paired with a guy like Alexiak. They could certainly agree a really good shutdown pair, or you could put them on different pairs, pair them up with an offensively gifted guy, and so you have a guy who can stay back and be more of a defensive specialist. But certainly a great pickup here by Seattle. Nice to have a right-shot defensive defenseman on their roster here. From the Florida Panthers, they select goaltender Chris Driedger. Now, Driedger, another pending unrestricted free agent, signs a 3-year contract here with the Kraken, valued at $3.5 million. Driedger, of course, was a situation in Florida where they had 3 goalies, really, with Bobrovsky having a long-term deal and a no-move clause, and bright up-and-coming former first-round pick Spencer Knight being in the mix. It made Driedger expendable. I mean, he's a bit of a late bloomer, came from the Senators organization originally, after many years there of going up and down between their minor league system with a brief amount of NHL time. He ended up in Florida, finally got more of a chance to play, and has shown that he can play at this level. So even though it's a smaller sample size, Driedger's numbers have been extremely effective here the past couple of years, and he should be a big part of the future here for the Kraken. From the Los Angeles Kings, they select defenseman Curtis McDermott. Now, this is another pretty decent defenseman here for the Kraken. Not surprising to see Ron Francis load up on D-men, especially of this caliber. Certainly a lot of good choices here for the Kraken. Now, they had some other options in LA that they could have looked at, including a speedster like Andreas Athanasiou, but he has been very inconsistent with his offensive production. Hard to say what his future holds, if it's going to be in LA or elsewhere. But either way, McDermott here is a pretty decent pickup here for Seattle on the blue line. From the Minnesota Wild, they select defenseman Carson Soucy, another solid defenseman here with good size. He's been a pretty good third-pair defenseman during his time with Minnesota. I'm sure they're going to be unhappy to lose him for sure. After buying out Ryan Suter and now losing Soucy, there's certainly some big holes on that Wild blue line because of this. Like I said, he's another opportunity player here who can get more of a bigger role with the Kraken and have a chance to maybe do bigger things than he was doing with the Wild. But, could he even be paired with a guy like Alexiak? He's got the size and the strength, and it could be an excellent defenseman here for the Kraken to add to their already deep roster of defensemen. The Montreal Canadiens, they select a young defenseman, right-shot D, Cale Fleury. Yes, this is not Carey Price. Carey Price was available, and the Kraken ultimately elected not to go down that road. Of course, he's got 5 years left at $10.5 million. Certainly a big ticket. Ron Francis did address this on the expansion draft, basically saying they did make a strong consideration, but ultimately decided to go in a different direction. All their goalies are younger players, nobody making anywhere near that kind of money. So obviously Fleury still an excellent defenseman here, younger guy with more of an opportunity ahead of him. He is the brother of Hayden Fleury, who was selected from the Ducks as well. So obviously those two Fleury boys are going to get a chance here to play together on the Kraken roster. The Nashville Predators, they select forward Calle Järnkrok. Now Järnkrok's a pretty solid two-way forward, has a pretty decent contract, only making $2 million, signed a long-term deal here with Poyle and the Predators a while back, has a little bit of time left on it. Obviously, they decided not to go for some big-ticket players like Ryan Johansson and Matt Duchene from the Predators, who were both $8 million center icemen that were exposed and made available to the Kraken, but they resisted that, which is probably for the best here. Neither one of them are really living up to those contracts, so certainly another player here like Järnkrok, who's making a lot less money and is kind of a little bit of a utility player who can play maybe somewhere in your middle six, second or third line, or could even be a potential trade piece for them as well. Either way, a good selection here by Seattle. From the New Jersey Devils, they select forward Nathan Bastian. Now another younger, unproven player here. The Kraken was not afraid to make several choices here of younger players that don't have a ton of experience, that either could be UFAs, RFAs, or just looking for more opportunity, and Bastian certainly fits that bill. They had an opportunity to take a more experienced D like a PK Subban, but of course he comes with a major cap hit, which they probably aren't interested in. Even a guy like Will Butcher I thought might be the pick, making a significantly less than Subban, in that $3 to $4 million range. I thought he might be of interest to Seattle, but apparently their analytic people were not fond of Butcher's performance, and Bastian ends up being the pick. From the New York Islanders, they select forward Jordan Eberle. Now, Eberle ends up being the selection here from the Islanders instead of Josh Bailey, who was also a potential option for the franchise. Bailey, by many, are considered probably to be the better player. I think Eberle might be considered by some to be the better player, but to me, I probably would have picked Bailey, but that's just me. Ron Francis and his crew obviously have a lot of confidence in Eberle. Obviously, this is another loss for the Islanders, but it certainly creates some more additional cap flexibility, which they so desperately need here. Eberle was one of the players to appear on stage wearing his number 7 Kraken jersey, so certainly going to be a big piece here. Brings a lot of experience, has a lot of playoff experience from the last few years with the Islanders. Of course, previously played with the Oilers as well, so certainly going to be a tremendous pickup here and likely continue to play a top 6 role for the Kraken. New York Rangers, the Kraken select forward Colin Blackwell, who's certainly a hard-working kind of guy. Certainly somebody who got a lot of praise from Ron Francis when he made the announcement here. Blackwell's a little bit of a later blooming player, I guess you could probably say. They did have some other options here from the New York Rangers that might have been, considered more attractive by some, including a guy like a Julien Gauthier, who I thought might be the pick, a big, strong, heavy right winger who has the potential to be a 20-goal scorer, in my opinion, as well as some options on the blue line. But Blackwell ends up being the selection here from the New York Rangers. From the Ottawa Senators, the Seattle Kraken select goaltender Joey Daccord, who likely could be their number 2 or number 3 goaltender, along with the other guys that were selected here. Daccord is a young goalie making his way in Ottawa. They have a ton of young goalies. They could just not protect them all. Along with guys like Matt Murray, Philip Gustafsson, they also have like Mandalese and Mads Sogard as well. They have a pretty deep goaltending prospect pool. So unfortunately, Daccord had to be exposed, but that's Seattle's gain here. He's a guy who battles really hard, picked up his first NHL win earlier this season. Unfortunately, his season was ended early due to injury, and if that hadn't have changed and he could have been able to play more, then you know what? Things could be different here, and he might have been the goalie that the Senators ended up protecting if they would have had a chance to see more games from him. Of course, he's a former ASU guy in Arizona State, put that program on the map, and is looking for big things here from his time in Seattle. From the Philadelphia Flyers, they select Carson Twarynski. Now, another surprise, somewhat shocking selection here. Obviously, the Flyers had several players available, including Jacob Voracek and James Van Riemsdyk and Shane Gostisbehere, players that Coach Dave Haxtell is extremely familiar with, given he used to be the head coach for these guys with the Flyers, and many of them had their best seasons under his tutelage as the head coach. So, certainly another surprise pick here, and we'll see what Twarynski can do with the Kraken. From the Pittsburgh Penguins, they select forward Brandon Tanev, who is a really hard-working guy, likes to play a physical style of game, gets in your face, can produce a little bit offensively as well. Your prototypical third-line player in the NHL. And the crowd even had a good laugh at his headshot here, which you see on the screen. His answer to that was that he saw a ghost right before someone snapped the camera. So that's the excuse he's going with for this hilarious-looking headshot from the beginning of the 2020-21 season. Tanev was there on stage and should be a big part of the team's future here. Certainly can be a role player and a fan favorite, I think, for the Kraken fans. From the San Jose Sharks, the Kraken select Alexander True. He's a little bit more of an unknown player, another somewhat of a surprise pick, but there really wasn't a ton to pick from here with the With the Sharks, I might have taken forward like Dylan Gambrell, for example, a little bit more established, settled in to be like a fourth-line center. Could have been more of a, like I said, a player with more experience right away for the Kraken, but we'll see what True can do, and if more of an opportunity is exactly what he needs to further his career. Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning, they select center iceman Yanni Gourde. Gourde is your typical underdog story. When undrafted, worked his way through the minors, was a later bloomer getting to the NHL, and now he's a two-time Stanley Cup champion with a $5 million contract and one heck of a hockey player who certainly earned a lot of respect over the last few years. He is going to likely be a top six center for the Kraken, play an extremely important role, shutting down the opponents of top offensive players, playing on the PK, and just being an all-around good workhorse here for Hackstall's franchise. Heading to the Kraken for the Toronto Maple Leafs is Leafs legend Jared McCann. Yes, I joke about being a Leafs legend. He was acquired by the Leafs from Pittsburgh for this purpose. Now, of course, Kyle Dubas and the Leafs knew they were going to lose likely Alexander Kerfoot. Apparently, the Kraken had their eye on McCann. They struck a deal with Pittsburgh to bring him over, so they could only take one of the two. Both were available, and McCann ends up being your guy. He's been a typical, middle six kind of player, really evolved his game after a slow start to his career. There were times early on when he was first drafted first in the NHL that you wondered if he was going to make it long term, but he's really turned things around and has become a really nice, hardworking type of middle six center iceman that Seattle should enjoy having on the roster. From the Vancouver Canucks, the Kraken select young forward Cole Lynn. Now, the Canucks had a variety of players here that they could have picked from, many of which, though, were veteran players that had unfavorable contracts. They could have gone with a guy like a Jake Virtanen, who's a younger kind of player, but he certainly comes with some off-ice issues that he's working through right now as well. So they go with the safe pick, the young player that they can hopefully develop and get more of an opportunity than he was getting in Vancouver. And Cole Lynn very well could be a very productive forward for them moving forward. From the Washington Capitals, they select goaltender Vitek Vanacek. Now, Vanacek certainly had more of an opportunity this year. When Samsonov was out, he certainly played a big role and was excellent in doing so. Vanacek's another guy. He's a little bit of a late-blooming player, put in his time in the minors, and really honed his craft and developed into a nice, solid, still relatively young goaltender. So he, along with Decord and Dreger, will make up the three-man battery here for the Kraken going between the pipes. I would suspect that he'll have a shot at either being the starter or maybe a 1A, 1B with Dreger would be my most likely outcome, with Joey Decord likely finishing and being the number 3 goalie on the depth chart. From the Winnipeg Jets, they select forward Mason Appleton, who brings a lot of energy and speed to the lineup here. Appleton's a guy who's gotten a little bit more of an opportunity in the last little while with Winnipeg. This will be a big loss to them. They could have went with a defenseman like a steady right shot D, like a Dylan DeMello. They opted to go with Appleton though, so I do think in that regard the Jets are going to be happy. They're not losing yet another big piece of their blue line, but they will certainly miss Appleton's energy in minutes that he brings for them. Another guy with a bigger role in Seattle should be able to excel and take his career to the next level. So those were the 30 players taken by the Seattle Kraken. Of course, I want to know what your thoughts are down below. Of course, they had a very methodical approach here. Certainly some picks that were surprises in a good way, some picks that were surprises in a confusing kind of way. But I guess just like the Vegas Golden Knights, even though it may not appear to be a super strong team on paper right now, there's going to be other moves made. They can sign other free agents. There will be other trades completed, and this will not be the exact roster that hits the ice this fall when they play their very first ever NHL game. So let me know your thoughts on the Kraken roster and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll be keeping you up to date with all the latest news and rumors on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.